right, here we go. I'll call the Brattleboro Select Board meeting to order for Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. This is a special meeting. And let me ask Peter, has the meeting been properly warned?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. All right, I have a remark, which is really in the way of a safety reminder. I just want to tell people that they can always check the town website for COVID-19 information. And I find the Vermont Department of Health link very handy. Not only does it give you tips on safe gathering procedures, but also links to vaccination and booster shots and so forth. And today I noted that there's a special COVID-19 booster shot for BIPOC residents, and that is also on the website over on the far right under news, that there's a flyer indicating that there's a special program clinic on Saturday, November 13th and Saturday, November 20th. And it's at the Windham County Health Department office, 232 Main Street in Brattleboro. So just please remember to use that resource of our website and the health department and this booster clinic to help you with your COVID information. Peter, do you have comments?
I have three this evening. Thank you. The first is a seasonal reminder, and then I have a couple of pieces of information about upcoming select board meetings. So the seasonal reminder is that effective next Monday evening, the seasonal winter parking ban that restricts on-street parking in certain locations around town because we have to have the streets clear when snow flies so that we can be plowing out the streets. That goes into effect next Monday evening. So we get asked every time we announce this each year at this time of year, we get asked, why are we putting it into place when there's no sign of snow yet? And that's a really good question. It's a reasonable question. The answer is because we can't be sure when snow is going to fly. So it's a mid-November announcement each year. Sometimes we actually get snow before the parking ban goes into effect. But the intention is to make sure that people are aware of this and paying attention to it and looking for the light signals from the parking lots. There's yellow and purple lights depending on what kind of plowing and snow removal is going on. So this has all gone out in a news release today. We expect it to be covered by the newspapers in the days ahead. It's also, that news release is available to be reviewed on the town's website. But we do it at a certain date so that we're ready when the first snowfall comes. And that announcement went out today. The two announcements I'd like to make for the benefit of the public regarding upcoming select board meetings. The select board itself is well aware of this because we've done some coordinating together to make this happen. 1 week from tonight, per the action taken 1 week ago tonight, we will be, the select board and I, at the Central Fire Rescue Station. We will be there alone, but with BCTV making it possible for all of us to be in one room sharing a Zoom connection. The public location of the meeting will remain the select board meeting room so that people can go to where they're used to going to if they want to participate in the meeting. And there will be cameras there, just as there have been all throughout our hybrid meetings, so that folks who want to be in person can do that at the select board meeting room and appear on Zoom via that connection. We will continue to encourage members of the public, and most members of staff also will connect via Zoom. We encourage the public to continue to connect via Zoom, both for the convenience of it and for the, even increased safety of that versus the separate locations. So, so that's the update regarding the venues for the select board meeting. This will be the final night, at least for the foreseeable future, that we're all in our own separate individual boxes. And next week we'll be sharing one. And then on December 14th, the December check-in regarding community safety will occur. And we had some discussion last week around community safety. Select board members quite rightly said, we really need to button down that date so we can announce it so the community can be aware. So I'm announcing tonight, we will make sure that it's on the town calendar and pushed out through other means as well, that December 14th, Tuesday, December 14th at 6:15 will be the next community-wide check-in at a select board meeting regarding community safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there select board members who have comments they'd like to make? Jess?
Sure. I just wanted to let everyone know, for those folks interested in housing issues in Brattleboro and the town's future planning and decision-making around housing, the Planning Commission has been doing some great work. They've been doing a study. They've been working with an organization, and they would like to have some community feedback on the work that's happened so far and some of the recommendations that they're thinking about bringing forward. So next Thursday at 6 o'clock, it's going to be on Zoom, and you can attend in person in the select board meeting room, 6 o'clock on Thursday. It's a great opportunity to weigh in on housing and the direction that the town and planning department will be going on that.
Thank you, Jess. Anyone? Oh, Peter?
Jess, may I add just a clarification? You said next Thursday, and you're exactly right, but just so people don't misunderstand, that's not 2 nights from now, but the following week on the 18th.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to comment? Tim?
My hand suddenly appeared. I think I just want to say a fun thing. I'm not sure anybody else was going to mention it, but if you folks don't know, last night Brattleboro was featured on a pretty high-profile Boston show called Chronicle, and it featured a lot of familiar faces to all of us, and it was really pretty well done. I encourage you, go to Downtown Brattleboro's Facebook page. I assume maybe their website might be posting it too, but I think you can watch the entire thing or in different segments, I'm not sure. But there were several segments on different community groups and members of our community, and Dick DeGray was there, and the Sisu Collective, and it was the University of Brattleboro made an appearance, and that's fun. So I highly recommend you checking it out, and it just kind of is nice to see sort of an outsider's view of our funky little town, and just be reminded of a cool place we live in.
Thank you, Tim. That's great. Anyone else? All right, seeing no one further. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak at this time on something that is not on our agenda this evening? All right, then. Seeing none, let's go right to the select board goals and ask Peter to discuss the revisions that he made that we discussed last meeting. Peter?
Thank you. Yes, during your review of the progress for the first 6 months of this select board year, regarding the goals that you set back in April, you had discussion of 3 changes that you'd like to make, additions that you'd like to make to your goals for the year. And you were pretty explicit in part, and then at other parts, there were some suggestions and some discussion, but we didn't land on explicit language. So I asked you at that time, and you indulged me with a yes, for the opportunity to be able to kind of process what you collectively had said and then put it down in what I think you intended. So I've done that as best I can, and I'll just read out the 3 additional goals as I have written them. And the question for you tonight is, do you need to tweak these at all, or do these accurately reflect what you intended, in which case you should adopt your amended goals? So the first is under diversity, equity, and inclusion, a third subset to that. that says, extend the work of the management team and IDEA committee to include members of the select board. Next is a third item under community safety, which reads, define an equitable and accessible process, parentheses, methodology, criteria, timing, and parentheses, for making allocations from the Community Safety Fund. And the third is under sustainability. It's a sixth goal under sustainability, and it says improve and expand local bus service.
Thank you, Peter. Do members of the select board want to discuss any of those items?
Could I just make a comment on the general process? Last time it was bugging me a little bit, and I think I'm going to just sound like a grumpy old man for a bit, but since it is our own goals and stuff, I think the first two items definitely fall into the category of we had an established goal and we're sort of tweaking it, you know, given circumstances, and it's certainly I think that kind of helps flesh it out for people and moves the ball along for both of those first two. I feel like in the improve and expand local bus service, since it's not like very specific, and I don't really understand what, and I think it was you, Liz, not to call you out. It just feels a little bit more like, oh, let's just add this thing on to goals that we had back in April, which feels kind of like mission creep to me, unless it gets further defined, you know.
Well, I would be happy to further define that for you, Tim.
And I just want to say thank you. And I just want to say, it doesn't mean I really want to discuss it. I'm happy with adopting our goals. I just want to understand that a little bit.
Okay. Well, if you look at number 5, we're seizing opportunities to promote multimodal transportation, especially biking, walking, and public transit. I just wanted to elaborate on that goal a little bit to talk about the fact that buses have a sustainability element to them, and that the bus service that currently serves us could be improved to provide better commuter usage and better sustainability marketing or programming, so that we really achieve the goal set forth in number 5. So I just see it as a tweak to that, but a reminder specifically for what we might want to do with the bus service.
Okay, I think when I read that, since it was a little bit vague and we hadn't really just talked about it, and it also occurred to me that anybody reading it might, you know, if you're not familiar with how Brattleboro bus service was created and everything, it's not the town that runs the bus services that we have here. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear, and we wouldn't all feel disappointed if we didn't indeed, by the end of our year, improve and expand the bus service.
Daniel, did I see your hand up?
You did, yeah. Given that we're in a budget meeting, is there not a place in the town's general fund budget where a contribution to the bus service is made? Do you propose expanding that contribution, or are you looking for sort of changes to how the service is done? And if so, how will that come about? What are our mechanisms for changing those things? I'm not saying that I don't want them to improve. I'm just wondering, like, what are the levers that we have?
Well, there is a discussion on the budget, and Randy from Southern Vermont Transit will come and speak to us at a date that Peter knows and I don't remember, to discuss.
November 30th.
November 30th. So I wanted to discuss those items at that meeting. I have no intention of raising the budget.
Okay. All right, great. Well, you and I have talked about the bus in years gone by, and we're both, you know, generally on the same page around it. So I'm sure at that meeting we can propose a couple of easy things that they can do that don't cost the town any money.
Exactly. Great. Ian?
I think kind of off Tim's point, maybe 6 could have just been kind of incorporated into 5, but I also think it's totally fine having it be its own separate item. And I agree. I also would love to improve and expand the local busing opportunities. I don't think the board is against that. So I actually just wanted to speak to thanking Peter for fleshing out and doing a great job on community safety 3. I think that's exactly kind of what the board was landing on, and I appreciate your succinct way of getting it down on paper. So I'm good with all 3 of these.
Peter.
Thanks, Ian, for that. That's not why I raised my hand, but thank you. I raised my hand because just for the sake of the folks who are in the meeting right now who may not be able to be in the meeting on November 30th, I thought it would be useful for folks to know that the contribution that the town makes annually to the bus service is $50,000. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. And while the discussion is likely to focus that night on service rather than on the dollar amount, just thought folks might appreciate knowing that it's a $50,000 contribution from Brattleboro to SEBT.
Great, thank you. All right. Yes, Jess,
Can I make a motion?
please do.
Oh, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt these revisions to the annual select board goals.
Thank you, Jess. Jess has made a motion that we adopt the revisions to the annual select board goals. All select board members in favor of that motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Very good. That has passed 5-0. And we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the proposed budget. So Peter, please take it away.
Thank you. This evening, we'll be looking at 3 categories of parts of the budget. The first is all of the revenues. There's 4 pages of revenues at the beginning of the budget. All the different sources of money that we collect in order to be able to afford the expenditures that ultimately are approved for implementing the services and programs and purchases of the town. So we'll look at all of the revenues across all of the town departments. And then you'll begin your department by department review. As you know, on each department will come before you over the course of the next month or so and be here on a particular evening to present the proposed expenditures for that department. And tonight, we kick that off with the Department of Public Works and the Department of Recreation and Parks. So I'll begin unless there's, I see Daniel does have a question.
In the backup material, you had written a memo about the use of fund balance. Are we going to discuss that?
Yeah, I was actually
on the agenda as like a separate thing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not on the agenda as a separate thing. It is covered neatly and completely under revenues. So that's how I plan to address it, if that's all right. And I'll start right there, and then we can go back into the 4 pages of line items. So I don't want to take the deep dive that I took last week. That would be excruciating for everyone in talking about assigned fund balance and unassigned fund balance and how prepaid expenses as a accounting category affects the unassigned and the assigned fund balance. We had a long conversation about that last week. If folks want to take that deeper dive, they can read the written explanation that I provided in the budget message, as well as in the backup for tonight's meeting, or can watch the recording of last night's meeting, or can give me a call. Any of those ways will help folks have a better handle on that arcane but important aspect of why there is less unassigned fund balance this year available for use in the following year's budget than there normally is. So starting there, just accepting that that's a fact, that there is less than usual and less than expected available. We had a conversation last week about my proposal to you that for this year and this year only, because of that unique aspect to this year's budget, that you set aside 9% of the unassigned fund balance instead of 10%. That would free up $200,000 of fund balance to be used in this budget and would, at this point in time, subject to the work in the weeks ahead, would reduce the amount of property tax increase needed to fund this budget down to a 3 penny increase from what is in the original documentation, a 4.7 cent increase. During the discussion that you had, it's kind of a brief preliminary discussion around this after the long explanation. Tim asked, what about 8%? You know, would it be appropriate? If it's okay to go down to 9, would it be okay to go down to 8? And so I promised at that time that I would put together, run the math on it and put together an explanation about it for your backup, which I did in my memorandum to you dated November 4th. It's in the backup tonight. Little additional information about use of fund balance in the FY23 budget. The 8% set aside would be okay from the point of view that we were focusing on, by the measure that we were focusing on last week, that being, would the amount of assigned fund balance because of prepaid expenses that will become unassigned next July 1st, would that amount exceed the amount that you would free up, so to speak, by going to 8% instead of 10%? It'd be about $400,000 of additional available funds. The answer is yes, that would be, it would pass that test. Going to 8% passes that test. There's a second consideration that we were not focused on last week that I think is very important for you to consider, which is we've been over a period of years trying to increase the amount of cash that the town puts from the revenues that we collect in this year's budget into this year's capital expenses. So we use the fund balance when there is a fund balance available to be used in any given fiscal year. We use that fund balance towards capital because the capital expenses, for the most part, not all of them, but most of them, are expenses that are one-time expenses. There are expenses that if we needed to, we could live without the next year. If we had, for instance, a bad year when we didn't have fund balance that was available. Over time, what we want to do is be affording our capital needs, affording the costs of our capital needs using our real-time revenues. Think of it like a household, having enough income that we can actually pay for doing the things we need to do, rather than having to borrow from our savings account, essentially, by using fund balance. We set a goal when we were back at around $350,000 cash or real-time revenues almost a decade ago, 6 or 7 years ago. We set a goal of getting to $1 million a year, and we got to that 2 years ago. But we found that we still, and you'll recall, I think, quite vividly from the discussions a year ago around particularly paving, but some other aspects of our capital work as well, we still aren't able to afford all of the things that are needed and wanted in terms of catching up to the condition of our infrastructure in this, we're a mature community. We have a lot of old infrastructure. We have significant needs. We're doing a lot better than we used to at keeping up with those, and we've applied some really good practices to it. We're going to talk next week in the capital discussion about the very strong commitment we've made and are keeping to ourselves and to the community regarding the replacement of equipment. With projects, it's harder. Projects are not as well defined as what it is to replace a dump truck or to replace a pickup truck or some other vehicle or piece of equipment. Projects, take more time and are more sort of a moving target. They can be more of a moving target. But the fact is that with our annual replacement of equipment running now at about $800,000 a year, and it will stay, now that we've committed to this program, it's going to stay pretty stable over time. But it was a lift to get to $800,000 a year. Then in order to also afford several $100,000 worth of project-related work for sidewalks and paving and other sorts of needs, this year there's a request for replacing the fire alarm system at the library, which is obviously an essential need. So we've set a new goal 2 years ago of getting to $1.5 million a year of real-time revenues. The revenues we're collecting in a year being committed to capital. We're trying to get to $1.5 million. It will take several years to get there, just as it took several years to go from 350,000 up to $1 million. Its past budget, or the one that we're in right now, there was $1,050,000 of real-time revenues committed to capital. If we did the 8% set-aside alternative, while it passes the test of the assigned and unassigned fund balance matter, it doesn't take us too low to bounce back to being at 10% next July 1st. It does take us backwards on the real-time revenue commitment to capital, and it takes us substantially backwards. It would take us down to $900,000 of real-time revenue from the $1,050,000 that's being used in this year's budget. So I urge you not to go to 8%. I think there is a decision to be made about whether you do something in between the 8 and the 9, or whether you proceed with the 9 that I've recommended to you. On the top of the second page of my memo, there's a table that I think will be useful for making that decision. And while I'm happy to either just receive your direction on this tonight or assist you in a consideration of this matter further tonight, I would say this isn't something you have to decide tonight. There's plenty of time for you to give further consideration to this and be thinking about it in relation to the expenditure decisions you're going to be making in the weeks ahead, and come back to it to make a final decision before the process is finished. But just to put a finer point on it for this evening, if you did go all the way to 8%, the use of fund balance would be $450,000. The real-time revenues would be $951,000. The estimated property tax increase would be 1.3 cents. And if you did the 9% that I've suggested to you, it would be $249,000 worth of fund balance, $1.152 million of real-time revenues. So a $100,000 increase in the commitment to real-time revenues over last year's $1,050,000, and a 3-cent increase in the property taxes, assuming that there's no change between now and the end of the process regarding expenditures, which is unlikely, but just for tonight's purposes, since we don't have anything else that we can know at this time. And the third item, the one that's in between, I put there because it represents not only the midway point between the 8% and the 9%, but more importantly, I think for the purposes of the discussion around, we've got these two different parameters to consider before you make this decision. It's the one that would land us squarely right where we already are. No forward movement and no falling back in terms of commitment of real-time revenues to capital. So $1,051,000, a $1,000 increase in the commitment to capital, which would be a 2.1 cent increase in the property tax rate, and a use of fund balance of $350,000. Be happy to answer questions or have a discussion.
Question. I don't know if the chair
Go
saw my
ahead,
hand.
Daniel.
It was very tentative because, can of worms and all that. In my time on the board, we have, I believe, tried to keep, the property tax increases or the, impact on the taxpayer steady and kind of predictable, as predictable as things can be, right? And what I'm wondering, because of this whole, because we haven't got a shortage of money. It's not like we lost the money. It's just it's sitting someplace and we can't touch it, right? Is my understanding of it in a very vague layperson's kind of way. So what I'm wondering is, like, you know, say, for example, we were to accept the $249,000 of fund balance, which further down the road goes from assigned to unassigned. Is that likely to lead, and I know that you can't give me an ironclad answer on this, but is it likely to lead to a thing where, you know, we have this 3-cent increase in the tax rate this year, and then next year we'd be looking at 1.5 or 2 cents, or we're going to be more steady? Like, I'm concerned about the impact on the taxpayer, not because we don't have the money, but because of this silly rule. I'm concerned that as we move forward with this budget, there'll probably be a couple of things in it that we might want to say, well, hey, let's try and add in a little bit more there. In my experience on the board, this process has not been one of reducing the budget. And then my experience at town meeting has not been one of reducing the budget. So I'm just concerned that we may end up with a higher than, you know, acceptable increase to the taxpayer. And so were we to take that middle road now, we give ourselves a buffer, but I don't want to be, I don't know, reducing it now only to increase it later, you know?
May I?
I don't know if that makes sense.
Please,
It-
Peter.
It makes perfect sense. It's exactly what you need to be concerned about and why we do, for instance, the long-term financial plan, and think about decisions like this for a particular budget in the broader multi-year context. So while there is fund balance available that you could use to apply to this year's budget and bring the amount of property tax increase down to, you know, using these numbers, you know, as low as a little over a penny. The problem with that is that we do have this longer term need, and we've said to ourselves, you know, it's a commitment to ourselves. You can change that path, but that's a whole nother conversation, and I would really strongly urge you not to change that path. I'd like to say just a little bit more about why in a minute, but to get just to the math, to the point of the variations that you were talking about, because the 1.5 million is not an arbitrary goal for funding of real-time revenues into capital, because that's an actual demonstrated need, you know, at about 800 or 800 plus for equipment and another 600 or more for projects. You know, our funding need for capital this year is at 1.4 million and often exceeds 1.5 million. So what we're saying is it's going to be important over the longer haul that the town be funding $1.5 million a year into capital, so that you're able, when you need to go to 1.8 or 2 using the fund balance, right? You can cover those additional needs in a big year using the fund balance, because in your continuing expenses, we can reasonably foresee that in the years ahead, $1.5 million is going to be about what you ought to be allocating towards capital from the revenues of any given budget. So we're at the $1,050,000. It would be great if you funded this budget to get to 1.15 and take another step towards 1.5. In the longer run, that's going to be a really good, responsible move to make. And you can do that and only have a 3-cent increase. You've been, in the way that you were talking, Daniel, about trying to have sort of relatively steady. This has not been an explicit goal, but it has in fact been the reality that select boards over the last several years have been recommending to representative town meeting on average between 2.5 cents and 3.5 cents of increase. So the 3 sits squarely in the middle of that range. If you decided that you were going to go to a lesser amount of increase and use the $350,000 worth of fund balance and stay steady at where we are in terms of a commitment of cash to capital, that would still be a responsible decision. It's, you know, there's not a right and a wrong to these things. I think that is very much in play for you and still in keeping with your longer term goals. It doesn't make progress towards your longer term goal, but it doesn't slide backwards in a way that I think be precarious for the town going forward. And as of tonight, as of the expenditures that are before you at this time, it would be a 2.1 cent increase, so a lower than normal recommendation for the increase in taxes. And in a manner that's likely to be sort of sustainable in terms of next year or the year beyond, without it becoming a wild fluctuation. Going all the way to the $450,000 worth of usage, the 8% alternative, because it would drop us back in terms of the funding of cash, it actually would drop us back so far that we would be funding, basically you could think of it as funding the equipment and another $100,000 or so, a little more than $100,000 towards the projects, but paving alone is in for $400,000. Sidewalk replacement was $100,000 last year. I'm proposing $120,000 this year. And I see you got things to say, so I'll try to wrap this up. But the point here is moving backwards on that goal of trying to get to $1.5 million of real-time revenues committed to capital will cause you either to have to give up on the path we've been on of doing a better job of catching up to our infrastructure needs. You'll have to slow down on that or dial it back, or have to have a very significant increase in property taxes next year. And I would suggest to you either one of those is an undesirable outcome.
So somebody says paving and everybody's hands go up.
Yes.
Daniel?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know why, don't you? So we're about to get, presumably, right? Unless somebody tells me otherwise, we're about to get a little windfall of infrastructure money that will, I'm assuming this will be a one-time thing, And so last budget, we did talk about increasing the amount of money available in the budget for road and sidewalk work. And, that is a topic that is dear to the taxpayer's heart. I do want us to be able to fund more of that work because there's always more to be done. And I guess I'm just thinking, well, on this year, there may be a different pot of money from which to draw. So perhaps this would be a year where we could more responsibly put less fund balance towards that kind of work because we know there's going to be something else to kind of fill it up. So that's just my instinct reaction to that. And I just want to kind of put it out there. And now I'm going to shut up because I've already said way too much today.
Thank you, Daniel. Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, very much for this backup material. I agree with Daniel that I don't think we need to, and Peter, that we don't need to make a decision now. But I would like to let the board know that I find myself currently falling on, is this like an 8.5%? Is that what the 350,000 is? Something like that?
Yeah, about 8.5% use.
8.5%. So I'm finding myself on the 8.5 right now. And I've got a couple of reasons why. My experience from doing the budget last year was we were operating under a proposed estimated property tax increase, or I was operating under a proposed property tax increase number for the entire budget. And then right at the end, we decided to add some money in for paving and it bumped it up to a number that was a little higher than I thought it was going to be. And it's made me realize that when we're at the beginning of this process, we should probably be trying to start at a lower number so that if something comes up that is really important, we don't, quash that excitement and energy and innovation because we've spent all of our sort of percentage points and now we don't feel comfortable anymore. So I think simply from a budgeting perspective, starting at a lower number is just a better move. And then, we get at the end, we didn't do anything, maybe we go back up to the 9. Then the second point, and this is a little less, I might be a little less articulate here, but if we didn't have this situation with the accounting, we would have $500,000 in fund balance, which would be lower than the 1.3% increase that's presented as option 8% currently. And to me, this is just a management situation. where, you know, the town, like we as the leaders of this town, we've done things and we're in a position now where we don't have that money. But based on how we taxed people last year, really it should be much lower. And so I think that as responsible managers of the town, as leaders of the town, we have a responsibility to try to keep that tax rate more like what it would be had we had a more normal year with the fund balance. And so to me, that's looking like the 8.5 proposal at 350. I'm open and will be happy to hear alternative options as we continue with the budget, but that's kind of where I stand now.
Thank you, Ian. Go ahead, Peter, and then Tim.
I'll defer to Tim, but at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a clarifying point about the 500,000 and the 350,000.
Tim.
Okay. Well, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I do want to just say, to frame it slightly differently, I think it certainly would be irresponsible to really get into great nitty gritty on whether we're going 8%, 9%, 8.5% at this stage, because we have not yet heard the budget arguments. We have not yet. The biggest one for me is the elephant in the room is 2 new town positions, which is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money every year. And that's I have to be sold on both of those. So all of these numbers are assuming that we're going to be in agreement on those suggestions coming from staff and Peter. So that's number one. And then I want to chastise Peter a little bit because of the reference to the goal, the 1.5. Now, I mean, I'm very proud of having served on the boards that got us from a pretty low level. I think you said 350 up to $1 million pretty quickly. 350 maybe when you arrived. And that was largely your work and your urging but a multiple of boards that were accomplices in that positive change. Getting it to 1.5, from 350 is pretty darn impressive. But just like any household that has a goal, when they have a year where they feel they really need to repair the roof, the neighbor's fence is gonna suffer that year. I think, that's not the priority when you have water coming in from the roof. So, I'm not trying to be folksy or anything, but I think my chastisement to Peter would be that this is a general good goal that we have, the 1.5, but to say that we'll be setting ourselves back when we should be looking at the larger picture of everything in balance. I don't think that's really a thing, that it doesn't satisfy, I mean, we can spend 1 year where we don't make any progress because we know that in a couple more years, we'll be making substantial progress again. So anyway, that's all I wanted to get out there for now.
Yes, Peter.
So chastise taken. But the point that I wanted to make in response to Ian's comment, I will make, but it actually is sort of directly opposite to that. I'm sorry, Tim, I don't know of a gentler way to say it. It would be a step backwards to go to below the $1,050,000. So I totally agree with the point you made that it's too early. We haven't talked about the very first, you haven't spent 5 minutes yet on expenditures. So we should move on into that part of the discussion and come back to this later. There's no question about that. But the thing I wanted to be really clear about before we do that, because of the comment that you made, Ian, which I thought your explanation of how you arrive at 350, at least for the moment, was super sound. And then you had an observation you made about how we would have had 500,000. It's true that we would have had 500,000 technically in terms of what's assigned fund balance and what's unassigned fund balance. It is not true, though, that you would be looking at that in the proposed budget, because I can tell you, as the one responsible for bringing you a proposed budget, I would not have proposed going below $1,050,000 worth of real-time revenues committed to capital. because that is a step back, because regardless of all the other factors you're talking about, if you go back to, let's say 900 or 950 of commitment of real-time revenues to capital, you will have to increase taxes or some other kind of revenue in order to get it. Something other than fund balance is going to have to increase on the revenue side to get back up to the $1 million and then keep making progress over the years up to the 1.5. So
I appreciate that. Point taken. Yeah.
Let's hear from Jess and then Daniel.
Yeah, I just want to say, before coming into this conversation, I was really with Tim. Like, doesn't make sense to like make the taxpayers pay for this strange accounting situation and in such a significant way. But your comments tonight, Peter, about the capital expenses really remind me of a time, it was like 10 or 12 years ago. I remember talking over the fence to my neighbor Kate about the town budget and what was going on, and she handed me a copy, and one of the things that I noticed was that so much there was a significant line item for interest, because a lot of the capital purchases were being purchased through loans and that sort of thing way back then. It just felt like such a waste of money and such a way to just throw money away, I guess. And so I really appreciate the progress that's been made towards this, towards paying for everything in cash right up front and taking care of all the equipment that way. So yeah, you talked me off the 8% ledge.
Thank you, Jess. Dana, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I sort of want to be in defense of Ian a little bit, actually, because I'm rereading the memo here. And what it says is, and this is what you wrote last week, based on the substantial operating surplus at year-end FY21, we had expected to have more than 500,000 of fund balance available to fund capital needs or other one-time expenses in the FY23 budget. So when I read that, I sort of read that there was the expectation we would put 500,000 to those things.
But that would have been accompanied by if we had done that, and I'm not saying we would have, because we identified needs for this year of 1.4 million. If we had brought you a budget that recommended using $500,000 of fund balance, we would have recommended capital investment of over $1.5 million, because there wouldn't have been any circumstance where we would have recommended to you using less than $1,050,000 worth of real-time revenues.
All right, great, thank you.
I just want to say to people in this meeting and people listening at home, here's the situation, and stay tuned for how the select board reconciles the budget and goes through this process and comes to this determination, because we're all very invested in making this decision.
Making sausages.
Go ahead, Ian.
I'm just pushing back once on Tim. I really believe that talking about the property tax increase percentage throughout the budgeting process, from my experience last year, talking about it at the very beginning all the way through is really important, I think. So I agree that it's way too soon to make a decision about this, but I also think it's worth taking a little bit of time of the board's time to talk about this now, so it's on our minds as we move forward through it.
I'm saying that too. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we shouldn't look at this and start arguing the percentages of use of fund balance until we, and taking it as a fait accompli that we're going to be spending all this money.
Yeah, I hear that.
I think you all are in that place.
We're all very focused together, and Peter, thank you very much. You have other things you want to tell us, I assume.
Yes, ma'am. Let's talk about the actual proposed revenue line items, of which there are 4 pages. We begin at the top of page 1 of the proposed budget. And investment income, I'm going to speak to the things that are changing. There's about 3/4 or more of the line items that are anticipated to just be another year of about the same. If you have a question about any of those or something you want to discuss about any of those, I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm going to point out why some of the items are different. So we're anticipating a $10,000 increase in investment income only because we've really bottomed out on that because interest rates bottomed out. And so our expectation is, we're looking at a budget that's going to begin 8 months away, 7.5 months away, and then last 12 months out beyond that. And none of us can know what's going to be happening with interest rates, but it seems reasonable to expect they're going to have gone back up some. So we didn't get crazy with that number, but we do anticipate a $10,000 increase from 30,000 to 40,000. I'm going to skip over the taxes item because we've talked a lot about that, and that's going to, in the end, be, the crux of the decision making that you come to in January when you've made a lot of other decisions that contribute to that number. Looking further down through the taxes section, we're showing a $10,000 increase in meals, alcohol, and rooms because, as we talked about in the long-term financial plan, we believe that it's going to slowly increase. It went down from almost $450,000 down to $375,000 and then to $371,000 in the 2 years affected by COVID. We're anticipating that there's kind of an equilibrium we're at right now. Who knows what we've got ahead of us, COVID related, but it seems reasonable to believe that restaurant activity and lodging activity isn't going to go down any further and is likely going to, now recover over time. And so we're showing a $10,000 expected increase from $385,000 to $395,000 in that line item.
Procedural question.
Yes.
Do you want questions as we come across things, or
Yeah,
when
sure.
we get to the end of the section?
Just leap in as we hit an item that you want to talk.
Thank you. I want to let my fellow board members know that in addition to the proposed budget, I'm also looking at our most recent financial report as well, because that's an interesting thing to see actual FY22, because all we see in here is budget FY22. And so we've yet to receive a sales tax payment from the state. Can you remind me when we might expect to see the first one of this fiscal year? Any
day now.
Right.
They come about 6 weeks after the end of the quarter.
Okay.
Sales and meals and rooms, right?
Both of them.
Yeah. I guess I'm just we're budgeting 950,000. FY21 actual was 953. Are we being a little too cautious with that? And maybe we could bump it up like $1,050,000. I don't know. I forget the math, but another 100,000 on top of that.
Yep. So the one I was speaking to was actually the one just before that about rooms and meals. I think there's reason to be cautious. No, it's fine. It's reason to be cautious on rooms and meals because that's stayed pretty stable. It went down and then it stayed pretty stable. 375, 371. We want to see that start making that increase that we're expecting before we get any more aggressive with it, I think, than just a little incremental increase. But I quite agree with you that, we through every year of our experience with the sales tax, we've done far better than we had expected to. And so, yeah, what we're doing in order for us as staff not to be overly aggressive with this number is using the last known number and applying it to this proposed budget. I think there's every reason you won't have 2 quarters, unfortunately. It'd be nice if you had 2 quarters to work with by the time you're making budget decisions. But there's every reason once we get this first quarterly report for this fiscal year, if it comes in startlingly higher than the pace of last year, I think there's a conversation for you that you ought to have about whether 950 is enough or whether it's overly conservative. And we will have that number here in the next week or two and plenty of time still to discuss it while you're in the midst of budget work.
Great. Please put that on some piece of paper somewhere so we can circle back to that later on.
Sure.
And every additional $100,000 gets back to that chart about the use of fund balance.
Exactly.
Yep. Good. Okay. And then there's 3 line items in a row, interest, penalty, and collection charges that we are increasing this year. I would put an asterisk on those, that these are not going to be recurring. We certainly hope these are not going to be recurring sources of revenue at this level, but we do believe it's going to be another fiscal year before things start to even out for folks who did fall behind in property tax payments. And so what's happening is as that, it's kind of a, sorry, it's a rat moving through the snake statistically. You know, you can kind of, the visual is grotesque, but useful. You know, so you get this increase in delinquencies in a particular year. And then over the next couple of years, that bump moves through other impacts. And so the other impact that we're seeing now as those, we have this year where we've recovered some of those expenses, some of those ones that had fallen behind are now current again through tax sale or people just redeeming. That comes with payment and interest penalty and interest payments. So where we typically run more around, you know, $50,000 for interest and penalty and $10,000 to $15,000 for collection charges, we're at 75, 75, and 25 for those, and expecting that there'll be a second year of that before it'll go back down. And so that's why these are shown this way in the budget. I should say one other thing, probably. I think the select board members are all well aware of this, but the public may not be. And I think it's an important distinction as we move from revenues at this part of the meeting into the expenditures discussion beginning later tonight. The expenditures are proposed, right? They're sort of totally within our discretion. You can tell us to cut something. We'll tell you what the impact of cutting that would be. But at the end of the day, you get to decide, with the exception of some things like what we owe the employees through collective bargaining agreements and that sort of thing. You know, what we spend is more relatively controllable by us. The revenue is not so much, other than taxes, other than property taxes, actually, because there are a lot of outside forces that impact all the non-property tax line items of revenue. So the nomenclature is important. It's not inadvertent that we talk about proposed expenditures, but anticipated or estimated revenues, because we're not so much proposing a number as we are reporting to you our expectation of what is likely to be collected. You know, where there is some judgment involved, we'll usually go on the conservative side, as we've already talked about tonight regarding the sales tax. And so there's a little bit of opportunity there for you to poke at those and maybe adjust those some, depending on, you know, all the totality of the circumstances around a particular line item. But more or less, as we go through these items of revenue, we're talking about what we actually think we're going to collect rather than a proposal of something that we're aspiring to. The next thing I was going to speak to was
Didn't get the question.
Oh,
Sorry.
Comment.
This feels like the perfect time to ask this question, Peter. Can you just give us a 30-second summary of where we stand with property assessments in relation to the grand list? Like, are we due? Because it's going to be on everybody's mind. Property values are crazy.
yes,
now.
they are. So we should talk about that on the evening that Jen Burnell is here, the town assessor, who can speak to it with far more precision than I can. I can tell you this generally, both about what's been happening in Brattleboro and what's been happening across the state. Up until the boom, the real estate property value sales boom of the last year or so, Brattleboro property values were solidly within the range of what the state looks at to determine whether or not you're getting far enough out of whack to need to do a reappraisal, townwide reappraisal process. Because it's been a while now, more than a decade since Brattleboro did one, there will come a time, even if there hadn't been this impact of COVID, this sort of oddly ironic positive impact to values from COVID, there would come a time anyway where even if there wasn't much change in the values, it would just become time to do one. Honestly, I don't know exactly when the state would intervene and say, you know, it's been 12 years, it's been 15 years, it's been some other number. Now, Brattleboro, you need to do a reappraisal. But there would come a time when they would impose that upon us. The necessity of a reappraisal would be triggered sooner than that if in the normal course of things, we got far enough out of whack with what was sort of considered normal and properly calibrated vis-a-vis the other communities across the state. The reason why this matters so much and the reason why the state regulates it so aggressively is because of the statewide property tax process for funding education. So if we got way out of whack, our town budget would still, there'd be some internal inequities that we might be concerned about addressing. But in the end, we would still be raising from local folks the money we need to do meet our local needs. That's not true when you think about Brattleboro's share of the statewide contributions to the education, which is why the state gets very interested in, which communities are relatively near, what's expected and which ones are falling out of what's expected, so that there can be some corrective action to keep everybody, sort of relatively more equal. And then there's a formula they use to adjust for the variations that occur within those ranges. So here's what I understand, but I understand it secondhand. I don't understand it from the state. I understand it from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, from some communication they've had with the state and some advice we received recently at a statewide meeting of town managers. The state is actually kind of trying to figure out what to do about requiring reappraisals based on what has happened with numbers going out of whack because of the COVID boom, because everybody has experienced the COVID boom. And so, you can't have everybody in the state doing a reappraisal at the same time. The system just can't absorb that. There's only a certain amount of expertise around to be able to go in town by town and do the work that's necessary. And so it's not at all clear what that schedule is going to look like and where Brattleboro is going to fit on it. I will talk with Jen between now and when it's her turn to come here, and we can have a little bit more conversation about it that night. I don't think we're going to be able to speak definitively to it.
Yeah,
but I would say that pre-COVID, we were not as far out of whack as some other communities, and we were not imminently, on the eve of a reappraisal.
Yeah, as far as we know, a reappraisal is not imminent.
As far as we know, it's not imminent.
My sense is that we're not as out of whack as other places.
I honestly just don't know the answer to that. But if the COVID boom has caused us to become more out of whack relative to other places, it's not yet clear by what process the state's going to determine who goes first and who goes second and who goes after that, because they can't do everybody at once.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to move on to the town clerk line items of revenue, if that's all right. And there you see a substantial increase, which is unusual in these accounts. It's because of something that I missed last year. We budgeted at 105. We actually had had a year when we had collected somewhat higher than that. There also was then a fee increase, and we collected based on the cumulative impact of that fee increase, collected actual numbers in FY21 of over $150,000, 151,219. We haven't had a fee increase since then, so unlike the sales tax item, I don't think this one is ripe for pushing higher, but it certainly is ripe to bring up to the actual collection number from the last last complete year. So we've put in an estimated $150,000 up from last year's 105. Daniel?
Yeah. Are town clerk fees cyclical, or do they happen kind of consistently throughout the year, or is it just random?
They don't happen consistently throughout the year. Different ones are collected at different times.
Okay.
They are consistent from year to year, but not consistent from month to month.
Okay.
And I see Hillary coming into the meeting, so she can shed some more light on that.
Good evening, Hillary.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you? So our revenues are sort of broken out into dog license, liquor license, and town clerk fees. The liquor licenses and dog licenses tend to be heaviest in the first quarter of the calendar year. Revenue comes in throughout the year for both of those, but that's when we see the largest revenue coming in. our town clerk fees are more even throughout the year. That includes birth certificates, death certificates, any sort of vital record certificates, marriage licenses, things like that. And the fee increase that Peter was talking about is actually related to our land record fees. The state increased that 50%. And that goes with when we see more land record transactions. So it's not, like Peter said, it's not even month to month, but it's more evenly spread throughout the year than our dog licenses and liquor licenses.
So in addition to the increase, there's also the rapidity of house sales because of COVID that increased? funding?
Yes, I would say that the funding increased threefold. One is the 50% increase in the recording fee itself. One is the increase in activity that we saw in the transactions, which may or may not continue. We don't know. And then the third is when somebody prints, say, a deed or any sort of land record through our online land record system. If they do it in our office, it costs a certain amount. And then if they do it remotely, it costs 3 times that amount. And we see half of that, and then the land record company sees half of that. So basically we see an extra 50 cents for every time somebody prints remotely instead of coming into the office. Whether or not people got comfortable with that and will choose to continue printing remotely instead of coming into the office, we don't know. So a lot of that remains to be seen, but I'd say the biggest jump is because of the 50% increase in the fee itself.
Thank you. Daniel?
So I noticed that actual receipts this year are $41,904.68, with us being 3 months into the 12-month year. So we could maybe reasonably expect to project out around about 160,000 in revenue over a 12-month period. I don't know. I'm just trying to find ways to, like, you know, do the right thing by the taxpayer this year. Peter.
So far be it from me to declare myself not interested in doing right by the taxpayers. I do want to urge you to be really careful about using any 3 months ever as a guide to an annualized number. And especially, you know, in this period of time right now when things are so abnormal. So I'm with you on the desire. I think you nailed it on sales tax. I think there is a real opportunity there, and we should look for seizing that opportunity if we think we can once we see real numbers come in. I'm happy to keep working with you on trying to find some more like that, but we should be really careful not to use just a few months of data to extrapolate into a whole year's expectation.
Okay. I guess I also note that there's 151,000 of actual, you know, revenue in the previous.
Absolutely. And that's the one we're tying to think, you know, we don't have a reason to believe it would go down. We also think we should be cautious for the reasons that Hillary explained about what has caused it. We should be cautious about thinking it's going to go up.
Great. All right.
Hillary, did you have your hand up to say some more? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hillary. And maybe we should
Sorry.
take those documents away from Daniel.
Hey, what can I say? I'm just trying
Not
to.
proposing that.
I'm kidding.
You know,
It's great, actually.
and you like it. I know you do, Tim.
I love it.
Okay. The employee contributions to healthcare, there's a couple of quick things to note there. The most important one as we do this budget is that this is the 3rd year of a 3-year phase-in. So the employees' contribution rate to the health insurance premiums is going from 3% to 5%. That's why you see a very substantial increase from last year's estimate of $65,000 to the forecast of $120,000, a $55,000 increase, which is half a penny on the tax rate. So this is an important item in terms of the overall context of this year's budget. The other thing that I'd like to point out here is there's 2 items of revenue that we show as revenue because it's important for us to be looking at a balanced budget, right? Where's the money coming from and where's it going? There are two items of revenue, however, that from an accounting point of view are actually not revenue. They're different than that. And each one is a little different from each other too, unfortunately. So I'm going to try to tell it really fast, but this is one of them. I think it's important to note it because otherwise you wonder why the history disappears. Okay. The history disappears here, and it disappears for a different reason at fund balance, because these are not actually line items of revenue. So the way this one works is it's actually in the accounting documents that show how a year turns out. Our costs for insurance premiums are reflected as being less than they actually were going out the door by the amount of what we have received from the employees. Okay, so if we're paying $1 in premium and the employees are paying 5 cents of that and the town is paying 95 cents of that, it's going to show up in the year-end accounting records as a 95-cent expenditure. So we get to the same place in terms of the outcome of the year, total revenues versus total expenditures. In the budget, we show it as a revenue so that it pops. Otherwise, it would be hidden. You'd never see this. And we would be under reflecting the amount that we actually pay to the insurance company for the insurance program. We want to show you the full expense, and we want to show you this offsetting revenue. But from an accounting perspective, and following the accounting rules, it's not actually a revenue, and that's why it shows up differently in the audit than it does in the budget. And it's why in the budget year by year numbers, it disappears from the history. Okay. The same thing is going to happen at fund balance, and I'll talk about the slight difference to that when we get to fund balance. The library, I'm not going to go through each individual item. You can see there's some very small adjustments. That's all based on just the actual receipts. We've been collecting less at the library, probably in part because there was less in-person service. But if you look at the multiple years of data, it wasn't just the 1 year that it went down. It's been going down. So that's why we've slightly adjusted some of those. Across the whole department, it's just down $7,500. So basically insignificant in a $20 million budget. The fire department, there's only one change and it's minor. That's a tower rent, because we rent space on there's an antenna on the central fire station, and that's an actual rent increase that we can reasonably anticipate. For the same reason, rental income at the municipal center is shown as going down by $13,000, $13,200 actually. That's because the state of Vermont has left the building. So we are receiving less rent than we were when state of Vermont Emergency Management maintained an office here, even though they had a very small presence over the last few years after Vermont Yankee shut down. And they now don't rent from us any longer. And so that's reflected here in the budget. Town ordinance under the police department, I'm sorry to tell you, is something I missed between the last year's budget and the long-term plan that we presented 6 or 8 weeks ago. And then we picked up the long-term plan number and put it into this year's budget. And as Patrick and I were preparing for tonight's meeting, I said, I can't remember why we were thinking that the police ordinance number would go up. I don't think it's going to go up. And he did some sleuthing and came back and said that we've knocked it down to 15 last year because that was a more appropriate number. You can see in the history from 18 through 21 that it is a more appropriate number. And then we just missed it in the long-term financial plan. I let that go through at $20,000 a year for each of the 5 years. We've made a note of that so that Patrick can make sure that it's properly reflected going forward. But for this year, we've had it in at $20,000.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that we don't really believe it's actually going to be 20,000. It's much more likely to be closer to 15.
Correct.
Okay. And there's no way to just have that reflected in this budget?
There is a way. So here's, it gets right at the heart of the conversation we've been having, and we will keep having from different angles over and over again, because we're all trying to make sure we're not taxing people more than we need to be taxing them. So my take on this was, and certainly the more fully responsible thing to do would be to knock it down to 15. That's $5,000 more that has to come from someplace else or from expenditure cuts. My take on it was, look, I made an error here. It should have been 15 instead of 20, but it's in for 20. And $5,000 on a $20 million budget is not something I think you need to worry about. So we could leave it, and that correction can be made later. If you want to really sort of be purist about it, we would knock it down to 15 now, and then it's just going to be one of those details that comes out in the wash once we, when you've made some decisions that are more impactful than this one. It'll end up being part of that final calculation, or it won't if we just left it at 20.
All right.
It was
I thought you were gonna say anything.
It was about 5 o'clock this afternoon that I even noticed that I should have knocked it down to 15. I left it at 20. And at that moment, what I thought is, I just need to disclose it to you, and we'll kind of see where it goes.
And town ordinance, for those budget watchers at home, means what?
This is money. This is actually one of those revenue items we can't predict well. It just happens. When citations are written that involve fines, those fines are paid to the state of Vermont. And through a formula that the state of Vermont refuses to disclose to municipal governments, they decide how much is theirs and how much is ours. And maybe how much is the court system, since that's operated county by county. I'm not really sure. What I know is from time to time, we get a check from the state of Vermont that is our share of those citations. And it's been running around $12,000 to $15,000 for the last several years.
All right.
It's our allowance
Yeah.
from mommy and daddy.
Thanks, state of Vermont.
Yeah, very helpful.
So I guess I'll pause long enough just to, do you want me to knock that down to 15, or do we want to move on? I'm sorry for the complication.
It's a budget.
I mean,
It's a budget.
Yeah. I just, like, I was really wanting to pick out some of those revenues that seemed lowball.
Right.
It seems both, it seems wrong to pick at those and not pick at this,
Yeah. So I hear that. At the same time, my reaction to that is probably not that helpful. I couldn't stand out in the public square. I guess I am standing out in the public square and feel good about saying this. It's a $20 million budget. There's 4 pages of revenue line items. There's 16 pages of expenditure line items. We missed some of them by a little. This one's $5,000. And the impact of knocking it back down to 15 is having to find $5,000 someplace else. For that reason, we've noted it. It won't happen again. And I didn't feel compelled to say, oh, and we must drop it down to 15. I feel bad about that because it was my mistake. And y'all are looking for ways to boost things up 5 or 10 grand if you can find them. So I think it's not the most irresponsible thing you could do to just let it go. But if it's like, now and we ought to correct it, that's right. Now and we probably ought to correct it. So,
Ian, you
Real
want to weigh in on this?
No, I just want to say I absolutely live for this. This is why I'm on the board, right? This is it.
Well, good. Then
Continue.
Ian's going to love my comment, which is that it's 0.00025 of the budget. So
yeah.
Well, but Daniel's got a point too, though.
Daniel, what we could do is establish
am I
a
wrong?
threshold of 10,000 and above. A
No, Daniel's
mistake
right.
should.
I like this for import threshold because such an insignificant number. We should just let this ride and save
It's
our
not-
plate for another day.
All right.
If it,
We're not gonna lose the money.
I was gonna say,
No,
if it
you're not
really
gonna lose the
matters,
money.
I mean,
It's-
maybe we can slide the sales tax up 5,000 and slide this down 5,000.
Oh, I'm
And that-
proposing we slide the sales tax up 100,000.
We're gonna wait till we get the
eventually when we
numbers.
have more data, but now we make it know better.
Well, let's just remember all these points, and if we want to make changes later, we can.
I'll make a note of it. We can make sure we come back to it.
Put it to a vote, Daniel.
I didn't hear what you said.
I'm joking.
Ian wants a vote, and I think we should move on.
Oh my God, I think it's a little early. We'll do that in January or whatever it is.
Yeah. The increase in rental income in the police department budget is because we have a new tenant at the 62 Black Mountain Road, and this is the actual rent we expect to receive from them.
Which amount is that from the police?
That in the center of the police line items, it's going from 18,000 to 22,240
Right.
rental income.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Regional state road construction money has been increasing by about $5,000 per year. So we are proposing to capture that here. We missed the year in between. The current year's budget says 230 because it had been 230 for a few years in a row. But when you look at the trend, it's 230, 235, 240 for the actuals. So anticipating that this year would be 245 and next year would be 250, we put 250 into next year's budget.
I'm lost. Can you tell me where this regional amount
This
comes
is at the top of page 4.
Oh.
State road construction is the line item and regional is the category.
Liz, I just have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Peter, so just help me understand this one. So this is actually just money that the state gives us for, so it's not them paying for like when they're doing work on
Exactly.
Route 9 or something. It's actually just money they give us.
Yes, and there's a reason why. Again, it's mysterious, so it's hard for us to predict. But the rationale behind it is, when they do those kinds of projects, like you said, they're coming to do a project and paying to do the project. Sometimes they look for a cost share, and that gets to be its own issue between us and them. This line item has nothing to do with VTrans doing its own work within the state highway system. This is where the town is doing roadway maintenance on roads that are, for instance, the parts of Route 9 and Route 5 in Brattleboro that are in Route 30 that are town maintained, town highway. They're inside the boundary of the state highway system. As you go out to the edges of town, you see those signs that say state highway begins here. It's an invisible line that you pass over, but outside of that, it's state maintained, and inside of that, it's town maintained. They share funds with all the municipalities around the state who do any kind of maintenance on pieces of state highway. And this is the check we received from them without explanation regarding that maintenance work that we do.
Okay, thank you.
In the recreation and parks, there's an increase for day camp in the revenue and also in the expenditure. This is where the increase in basically it's the same programming from year to year, but the last few years we've seen a fairly significant increase in the cost, and then reflected also in the revenue that's recovered through the program because of the increase in the minimum wage. There's almost all of the labor for putting on the day camp is young people in summer jobs working at minimum wage, some just a little bit above that if they've been with us a couple of years and are supervising other teens, but we have a lot of minimum wage employees, and so that increase is reflected on both sides of the budget. Which brings us to the use of fund balance, and I promise to keep this short. We don't need to take another long trip down the rabbit hole. What I would say here, just to explain the sort of parallel but not identical situation to what we talked about a couple of minutes ago with the employees' contributions to healthcare, is it disappears from our use of fund balance disappears from the budget history because we're showing actuals. It appears in the town's audits. That's where the use of fund balance in those years when we actually do consume some is shown. For instance, the 605 from last year, I'm sorry, the 605 is this year's. The figure of whatever it was last year, I think it was 300,000, 200 or 300,000 last year. we didn't actually spend. That was part of that surplus. So in last year's audit, the one that we're about to see, you won't see a use of fund balance because there wasn't a use of fund balance. We added the fund balance. But in years when we actually do draw it down, it's reflected in the audit, but it disappears as we go on into future years' budgets because of the fact that it's not actually a revenue. It's the number that's reflected by whether our real revenues in any given year exceeded our expenditures or didn't, which gets actually right back to the nub of that issue of why we don't want to be dependent on fund balance. We want to be collecting enough real-time revenue to pay for our recurring annual expenses. Okay. And here, this is a number that will change. It's in at $50,000 because that adheres to the 10% guideline. We've had plenty of conversation already, and we will have plenty more around what number you end up feeling is appropriate to put into that lineup.
Yeah.
Okay. There are very small changes, 2% each, total of $7,000 increase in the amount of the transfers from the utility fund to the parking fund. There's a formula that we use for that is the consideration of the fact that there are general fund employees who provide services that are administrative support for the two enterprise funds. That's the end of the revenues, unless you have additional questions or comments. End of the revenues for now. Are we ready to move on to expenditures?
Yes,
I'm
please.
good.
Great.
Thank you.
Dan Tyler is in the meeting and will join us now to present the proposed expenditures for DPW.
Good evening. So the Public Works expenditures start on page 15. I thought I'd just kind of go down through each category and highlight some of the bigger changes. There's some smaller annual increases throughout, but starting with the Public Works category, this is primarily staff salaries and administrative items. There's some changes in the first few lines due to staffing changes. And then when you jump down to telephone, pretty significant increase there, and that was an oversight in last year's budget. That number should have been higher, and we missed it.
Dan?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but particularly on items like the telephone, if you could call out sort of the magnitude of what we're talking about, just so that folks who aren't following along the document will know, for instance, in that case, that what we're talking about is about a $3,000 increase to $8,500.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Moving on to, we've got Public Work Bridges. This is kind of painting and repair, small repairs that we make in-house. That one's going to remain at $14,000. The next category, Public Works Drainage. Peter touched on this last week in his budget address. This is the efforts to comply with the changing state regulations. So we've got some pretty significant increases throughout. The first line, there's stormwater upgrades, increased from $50,000 last year to $70,000 this year. Engineering, up from $10,300 to $12,000. Permits and compliance, up from $20,000 to $25,000. Pipes, $10,300 to $10,600. Grates and risers, $4,700 to $4,800. And then other materials, that could be gravel or concrete needed around the structures, $10,300 to $10,500. So the increase in that Public Works drainage category is almost 26%. Hopefully, we've recently talked about the Stormwater Master Plan and the efforts that we're making with Stevens Associates to work towards the utility. Hopefully we'll get to that point and that'll take care of some of these increasing expenses.
Yeah.
The next,
I have a question.
sure.
Yeah, I have a quick question about Public Works bridges. Looks like the actual figures in that are pretty varied. And I'm assuming that the FY21 actual has a reason behind why it's so low. Is that COVID? Or
Yes,
was there
likely,
no
I
bridge
would-
repair?
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of these are unforeseen expenses, damages to the bridge. You know, the small numbers are, you know, painting a bridge railing or patching some concrete, something like that. But occasionally there's storm damage or something like that that might cost a little more. I would say that was likely COVID related, that we just weren't out and about and didn't get to some of these things.
Okay, thanks.
Were there other questions on the
No, thank you, Jan. Carry on.
Public Works equipment? The parts, that's parts for repairs of trucks and equipment done by our maintenance staff. Tires and accessories, small tools, it could be specialty equipment that the mechanics need to work on the equipment. Those are just small annual increases. Public Works, gas and oil. This is the diesel fuel and gasoline for all the trucks and equipment, and the lube and oil for general maintenance. Public Works, summer roads, chloride for dust control on the dirt roads. Hot mix that lines the asphalt that we use for patching throughout the year. Cold patch for off-season patching, gravel road repairs, and guardrail repairs. And then there's Public Works sidewalks, which includes sidewalk repairs. That's a increase from 30,000 to 32,500. These are smaller repairs of shorter sections of sidewalk that we might do in-house, not necessarily a larger project that we'd put out to a contractor, and then repairing deteriorated panels or crosswalks, stuff like that. Public Works miscellaneous.
Dan,
Sure.
I think the same point that Daniel made about COVID, under sidewalk repairs, the actual for 2021 was significantly less, and it's probably the same reason you didn't have crews out there.
Yeah, there was a significant amount of time where the crews were cut in half, you know, and splitting shifts, and you know, we were just kind of focused on the musts and the stuff that had to be done. So
Thank
I
you.
think that's likely the case.
And Daniel has a question.
Yeah, just following on from that. And so the FY22 budgeted figure was 30,000, which was a policy shift, right? That was like a choosing to put more money into that line than usual, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
I believe
preceding
we
that, it's
went-
like, you know.
I believe we went to, I think it was 25,000 in the 21 budget. I'm not sure. We'd have to go back and check that. And then up to 30 for the 22, with the intention of continuing to scooch it up going forward now by this $2,500 a year, at least for the next few years.
Great.
Right.
Thank you, Jan. Continue.
So Public Works, streets, miscellaneous. The big increase in this one is tree care, 2,000 to 2,500. We've come across a lot of trees within the right of way that don't necessarily need to be cut, but we're making more of an investment in pruning and trimming and trying to maintain their health. And that line's always been separate from the tree removal line. Then we move on to Public Works winter roads, salt, sand, chains and blades. That's the tire chains and the plow edges. Equipment maintenance is this one's specific to the plows and salters and, you know, winter specific equipment. Yard expense, the fuel expense in that line is for heating fuel. Electric, utilities being phone and internet, building repairs, maintenance and supplies, and then refuse is the trash. Traffic lights, an increase to contractual repairs of $500. Joe Newton, the alarm superintendent, takes care of a lot of the traffic light maintenance and issues for us, but every once in a while we run into stuff that, you know, he can't do and we need to bring someone in from the outside, and we've just experienced that that's expensive. So asking to bump that one up a little bit. And then the regional line at the bottom is our Wyndham Regional contribution and the county tax.
And that's the end there of the Public Works.
Right, and interestingly, I don't know, there's no total on Public Works. So I totaled it up. It's $2,210,633.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and I welcome you to the budget sessions.
Thank you.
My wife saw the sidewalk plow today. Do you guys know something that we don't? It was bopping around Moreland Avenue.
Yeah, new operator, new piece of equipment, just trying to get some experience and learn the routes.
All right,
So,
great.
Preparing.
I'll keep my snow shovel in the basement.
Let's hope
for
we
now.
don't need it anytime
Yeah.
soon. But
Just because you pointed it out, I probably wouldn't have noticed you didn't have a total. Do you have a total of percentage change by any chance, or?
I don't.
Okay. I thought maybe
We can get you that.
it's no big deal, but I know it's minimal, so.
Jess?
Just ask a question about your process. I was curious if the big supply chain disruptions and materials cost expenses going up all around the country, if that's impacting the Public Works Department, and if that is reflected in the numbers that you decided on for the next year.
We've certainly noticed an increase in cost. I would say the bigger thing is availability, just the delay to get these materials. We've got orders in for pipe and materials like that for next year already, and we're waiting on supplies to come in, but we definitely took into account the cost increase that we've noticed. I'd say we're seeing more of an effect on the utilities end of things. It's causing delays at the Pleasant Valley project, and just even in our operations, delays in getting parts for water meters and just everyday stuff that typically you could have the next day.
That's really interesting. I'm just to follow up, Peter, with that process changing of maybe needing to order materials sooner or well in advance of when they're needed. Is that gonna come back and affect the prepaid expenses?
So it will, to the degree that those get charged against an expense for the following year. The kinds of things that Dan's talking about are more things we try to keep in stock so that we're ready to make repairs. And so I believe that in this particular context, it's not likely to affect. If it was something that was actually for, say, like the purchase of a vehicle that's going to be next year, it's going to be delivered next year, and we order it this year, then that would be a prepaid expense. But
Right.
Ordering pipe 6 months in advance so that we get it as soon as we can to keep enough pipe in stock is not going to have to be a prepaid expense. That's just going to be an expense that we bear at the time that it's delivered.
Right. It's more of a construction season thing for us and having it available for that.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else have Ian?
Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for the presentation. I don't know if this is a question for you or Peter, but I'm just curious. So like when we had the water main issue on Bridge Street, what, like, does that come from a line item here for anticipation of like a thing like that? Or is that for the, that's why we're putting other money away and it doesn't part of this anticipated budget?
That's the utilities account, so that's totally different.
Totally different.
So the water and sewer are in the enterprise fund. All of those expenses are in the utilities enterprise fund. And so that's not reflected in any of these items we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And actually, that's the reason why we want to put drainage on that same kind of a fee for service arrangement, because it is becoming a significant enough expense that it's just going to be better and fairer to have it be a utility and not be funded through general fund and through taxes.
Yeah.
Tim, did I see your hand?
Yeah, just really briefly, and I doubt it's a question for Dan, but maybe it's for Peter. I remember last year we kind of grilled Wyndham Regional on the services, and we were generally impressed with everything they do for us. County tax also came up at that time. Can you remind us?
So I can give you the answer. I can't give you a very satisfying one to this. So the Wyndham Regional is actually a determined number. The commission itself, adopts a budget and adopts an assessment that's going to be charged per capita. So each community pays their per capita fair share. The county tax is not that. The county tax is another one of those mysterious processes without a known formula. We get told how much we owe. You can see that we're catching up to a reality there. We had been paying down around 75, 81, 83. We had budgeted 88 for this year, but our actual last year increased to 101 unexpectedly. We've been told to expect an incremental increase this year. So we're showing an increase from 101 to 104, but the budgeted increase is from 88 to 104. So it looks like a very big increase. The very big increase was actually a year ago and without any explanation.
And how would a particularly annoying select board member find out that information?
How would you find out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go after whoever you point me at.
So
because I want to know what they do with this.
Well, yeah, it's let's talk about it offline. I'm happy to try to help you find someone to have a meaningful conversation with about that. Honestly, it's a factor of Vermont county government being so minuscule and not a service delivery function. So in states that have counties that actually provide services, a variety of services, there's usually a county tax rate that individuals pay along with their municipal tax rate. But in Vermont, because there's so little in the way of a county government, the system is that they charge the municipalities, and theoretically, we're just collecting this $100,000. It's about a penny. We collect that through our taxes and we pay it to the county. And they don't tell us how it's calculated, but
they just tell us when it goes up.
To talk to.
It just goes up.
Yeah.
And my final question is, why does it exist in DPW? Is just that where we always put it?
No, because there was no total.
Yeah, that's actually it's just the next cluster.
Oh, okay.
It was inadvertent. It's not a DPW expense. It's a broad county expense.
Yeah, I didn't see a space.
I will say, though, that it was interesting that Tim identified if there were an annoying select board member, and Peter immediately jumped on the fact that, of course, it was Tim.
I'm going to take that as a compliment. I don't care.
I think that's running me under the bus. We're back to the bus.
It's all good. It's all good.
Okay, Jess.
Slightly off topic, but slightly related question is the infrastructure bill that just passed. So I'm curious, when that money comes through or the way that it becomes available, may help with some of these expenses or one-time expenses, or, how, I'm just curious about how that might get applied.
Sure. That's likely to have a significant impact on capital projects and not likely to have any kind of a significant impact to the operating budget. And we don't know yet. It got passed last Saturday. So, as soon as we've got some information we can share about the magnitude of what's going to come to Vermont and then through Vermont to us and by what mechanisms we'll be able to access that money, I think it is a very realistic expectation that we're going to be able to get to some projects quicker and better than we had expected to be able to do, because there's going to be a lot of money flowing, and the details of that are, unknowable at this moment.
Daniel, you
Public-
putting the bid in now for your own
Yes.
sidewalk plow?
No. I'm good. And Public Works has a long list of projects that need doing, I'm assuming. Right?
Absolutely. And some getting quite close to ready to be constructed, right? So the intersection safety improvements that we've been talking about the last few years, one of those is essentially fully designed. Another one is in the design process. So, we can accelerate some of those things that we can do for ourselves to become what they call shovel ready. So then we can go for this grant money and say, we got a project that's ready. Send us a couple $100,000 and we'll get it done. It's going to be a process like that, but the details of how and when are not yet known.
I like that kind of grant application. You just tell them and they send you the money.
All right.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan, very much.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Are we ready for Carol now, Peter?
We are, unless you'd like to take an 8 o'clock break.
Oh, I think we would. Yes. 10 minutes, everyone? Yeah, see you at 8:12. All right, we're back. And let's call Carol.
Come on down.
As Carol comes into the meeting, just advise everybody that the Rec and Parks budget begins at the top of page 18.
Thank you. Good evening, Carol.
Carol's at the lake.
Killarney Lake in Ireland. I'm on vacation. Just
Oh,
kidding.
lovely.
Isn't it?
Very early in the morning there.
I think that's a lot of malarkey, huh?
Think so. So good evening. I'd like to start out by just giving you a quick overview of what the department is all about and what we have for employees and what we have for programs. So you have an understanding where these funds are directed throughout the year. So with that being said, the department has eight full-time employees, including myself. So that's a director, an assistant director, a program coordinator, an administrative assistant, park supervisor, and 3 full-time maintenance staff. We rely heavily on our seasonal employees. We have over 40 seasonal employees, high school and college students from the area that cover the area of pool, anything from lifeguards to cashiers to water safety instructors to managers, skating rink seasonal staff, skate guards and cashiers, seasonal park maintenance, summer program day camp staff, and evening supervisors that help us in the Gibson Aiken Center through the winter months. One other thing that we rely heavily on is volunteer support from the community to help run our programs. And that's many of those are volunteer parents that help us run our youth sports programs, volunteers in the senior center, and miscellaneous volunteers throughout the year to help us with our special events. We have 9 youth programs. We have over 20 after-school programs and summer programs. We have 15 adult leagues and programs. We have 15 special events and over 30 plus programs and special events for senior citizens. In addition to the programs that we do, we schedule and coordinate our facilities with 13 different community organizations. And we take reservations for 16 different facilities and rooms that the department manages and maintains. Additionally, we're responsible for the maintenance of the parkland and facilities throughout Brattleboro. We have over 130 acres of parkland. This is inclusive of playgrounds, buildings, utilities, 12 mini parks, 5 traffic islands, 5 cemeteries, and facilities within Living Memorial Park. That includes a 300,000 gallon swimming pool, skate park, a dog park, a disc golf course, tennis pickleball courts, and a skating facility along with a picnic pavilion. On top of all that, we're responsible for maintaining the inside and outside of the Gibson-Aiken Center. But we work with the maintenance division to do that. So that's kind of a brief overview of what the department does. And what I'll do is go into give you a broad brush overview of the budget and break down the areas where you'll see an increase this year. We're asking for a budget figure of $893,095, which is up $64,295 from the current fiscal year. Majority of that increases has to do with the salary adjustments that have taken place through with union contracts. Other areas that you will see slight increases. When I say slight, when I'm talking about increases, I'm talking about anything over $500. Anything under $5 is kind of $500 is just kind of meeting what we have met in spending. Increases where you'll see is we have several fuel line items, several utility line items, several electric line items. You'll see increases in those areas to meet the demand that our budget takes. We have experienced, much like any of you in your own home, your personal budgets, increases across the board that are affecting our line items within the budget. And there you will see some of those line items that have gone up $500. To highlight the areas that have increased, I can highlight them, or I can go down line item by line item through the various divisions within my budget. I have 9 divisions within the budget that's inclusive of administration, Gibson-Aiken Center, parks, Gibson-Aiken Center program staff, senior center, skating rink, swimming pool, day camp, and cemetery maintenance. Would you like me to go down through them line item by line item in each category? Okay, so we will do that then. So I'll start out, as Peter's mentioned, the Rec and Parks budget starts on page 18. And as we go down through, the first portion is administration. Like I said, that's where you'll see some increases that are within the union contracts there, where those recent salary adjustments took place. And that affects both salaries and overtime. Other than that, there in the administration budget, there are no increases other than small increases in office supplies and transportation.
I'll just jump in.
Please.
That overtime line, how does overtime occur in Rec and Parks? Is that like understaffing? It seems like the actuals for the previous years were, a couple of grand lower than what's budgeted for this current year and FY23.
That particular line item for overtime is staffing, where a lot of staff has to work holidays. We have to cover a lot of weekends. We try to flex schedules as much as we can, but that is sometimes not always possible. So there's a little bit of an increase there. And that also is reflective of the increase in the salary increases.
Okay. And the transportation line,
Mhm.
what is that actually for?
The transportation, there's staff that are, not all activities take place at the Gibson Aiken Center. So staff is using their own vehicles and running to various parks around town. May have to run and get supplies within, the Brattleboro or Greater Brattleboro area for running those programs. Staff might attend a conference outside of the Brattleboro area, and that's what that covers.
Great, thanks.
Mileage reimbursement for
Correct. Yeah.
those trips.
Right.
When we move on to Gibson Aiken Center, that is the maintenance of the facility. The areas there that the biggest increase is in building repairs. As I mentioned before, is the areas where we're finding increased costs just to do the basic day-to-day things, whether it's purchasing, supplies such as paper supplies, or painting. That's where we've seen that increase. And the cost of the contractors to come in, the skilled contractors to come in and maintain the facility, whether it be plumbers, electric. As we move on to parks, again, one area that you'll see a constant theme throughout this budget is the area where we're using seasonal staff. And seasonal staff, as the minimum wage increases, those line items are increasing, and also we're having to increase what we're paying seasonal staff to attract more skilled labor, whether it be at the pool, whether it be park maintenance, whether it be for running our programs. You will notice in the like I said, the seasonal salaries, employees, you'll see where that's gone up. Another area that you're seeing as we go through it is the equipment line item. The equipments expenses gone up just a little bit. You'll see a $200 increase there. Also, you'll see that in our some benefits in the opposite direction by bulk purchasing with other departments. We were able to see a decrease in some of our spending, especially when it comes to like propane, when all the departments have worked together, that we all are seeing a benefit. Again, maintenance supplies, again, going up with the cost of material. The biggest one that you'll see a change here is program supplies at the bottom of the parks budget. And what that's for is the fireworks, the increased costs in fireworks, like everything. But this really took a big jump, and the minimum the minimum to be paid for a fireworks show, especially on the 4th of July, has gone from $5,000 to $10,000. So that's a big change. A majority of that money is fundraised, but we just felt in this budget we needed to support those fundraising efforts, because the jumping from $5,000 to $10,000 just might not be a realistic annual goal to be able to meet. As we move on to page 19 and continue through the park budget, you'll see that the grounds maintenance budget went up by $5,500. That is to repair the Fred Harris tennis pickleball courts. We have a lot of cracking going on and on that court, and just to preserve the court, we need to go in and do some basic maintenance, the longevity of the facility going. Equipment parts, again, the supply chain, the cost of purchasing equipment is just, support equipment has just been going up. I do want to point something out that as I was going through this today, I was like, this miscellaneous line item should actually be 0. Because that was something that we changed. I thought that would make somebody happy. What we did last year is we removed that miscellaneous. Miscellaneous became program supplies, which is the $2,700 plus the $5,000 for the fireworks. So I just have given you $2,700.
Given the town, the taxpayer.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, cemetery maintenance. You'll see that line item for contractual repairs has gone up by $2,000. And I received a request from the cemetery committee for us to put $5,000 in the budget this year for headstone repair on an annual basis. The way we handle the headstone repair is once we hit May in our budget, we have a pretty good idea where things look, and sometimes it's 2,000, sometimes it's 3,000, sometimes it's 4,000. But they would like, the cemetery committee would like to see a commitment within the Rec and Parks budget, not just where things stand at the end of the fiscal year, but something that can be counted on every year, and then add to what we're able to commit to headstone repair in both Prospect Hill and Morningside Cemetery. So we started out this year by adding 2,000 with the ultimate goal of getting to $5,000 in the next couple of years. Yeah.
Ian has a question.
Yeah, Carol, just quickly, mostly because I'm just interested. Is the town responsible for a certain subset of headstones because of like a certain time frame passes when it's no longer someone's personal responsibility? Or do we, as soon as you have a headstone in there, we have some sort of responsibility for maintenance?
We have a certain level of responsibility for maintaining the cemetery. Certainly when there's vandalism and stuff like that, there is an attempt to kind of redeem that. But there are times that it's just not feasible to go back to the families and have the families responsible for maintaining that space. So especially in Prospect Hill, which is an older cemetery, and just really taking that opportunity and preserving that is really what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a statutory responsibility that falls to the town.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So moving on to Gibson Aiken Center programs, that again, you'll see the salary, and that's our evening supervisors that are at the Gibson Aiken Center, again, reach that minimum wage. Senior Center contracts and operational supplies have remained the same. Moving down to the skating rink, again, staff salaries, the theme that I was talking about of meeting that minimum wage. You'll see the benefit there of the bulk purchase. So with working with all departments and getting that propane per gallon down, and which you're seeing the benefit here in the budget. Moving, the rest of those items are pretty much the same, except for electrical, which is meeting our current demand. Day camp staff salaries, again, that is the theme that we're talking about, meeting having an attractive wage scale and a minimum wage. And moving on to the pool, which is the same theme when it comes to staff salaries. And everything else across the board through the rest of those programs are pretty much a level to level funded compared to the highlights that I did speak about. Like I said, that mostly pertain to salaries and the minimum, trying to meet that minimum wage and putting out a wage that's attractive to those high school and college students.
Peter, would you like to say something?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. In this particular family of accounts within the Recreation and Parks programming, it's a place where we see more significant COVID impacts in the history of the last few years. And that's true both on the revenue side and on the expense side. So we've been substantially below the normal trends. You know, if you look at it like a 5-year trend, the last couple of years really dropped down significantly for both revenues and expenditures within Rec and Parks. What we've done in looking ahead to the next fiscal year, because it starts almost 8 months from now and will go on until 20 months from now, we've budgeted for, you know, what we expect is normal for, you know, a year that's not COVID impacted.
Yeah, that's a very good point that Peter just brought up. If you look at some of our actuals for 2020 and 2021, you can't really go back and go on that 5-year average, you know, like Peter said, both on the revenue side and on the expense side. Because last year we had less people in the skating rink, we had less people in the Gibson Aiken Center. And what we did is you'll notice, and our electricity and our fuel, you know, we made all those adjustments along the way. You know, at the skating rink last year, we raised the level of the ice temperature, you know, which in a turn gave us a positive benefit in the budget because we weren't bringing the revenue in. We didn't have as many people on the ice. You know, so those were all things that we took into effect we put into play last year, knowing we weren't going to meet our revenue, projected revenue. And so we also tried to look at both sides of the coin and affect our expenses as well.
Thank you. Daniel?
Carol, could you just talk about the 36% increase in operating supplies for the pool and just say a bit more about what that is?
So you are on
Page
Chlorine.
20. I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
On the operational supplies.
The operating supplies?
Yeah, that is definitely, there's a variety of things that go in there. It's the chlorine, it's the paint, you know, being able, you know, the cost of the paint, the cost of the chlorine, all that stuff is going up.
Okay.
And that's and it's impacting all of the operational supplies throughout the entire budget.
Thanks.
And the pool expenses is one area that actually hasn't varied because of COVID, because it's been one place where, you know, it's such a disinfected environment that we've been able to accommodate the public more readily.
Tim?
Carol, thank you for all you do. And I just have a quick, and I might have missed it, I apologize. In parks at the bottom of page 18, there's a new program supplies. Did you mention what that was? Because it's a relatively new category. You did.
Yes, what that category is the miscellaneous category that came out of previous budget sessions. So that line item has been cut, and then a new line item was created. So basically, essentially we moved the budget figure out of miscellaneous into program supplies, because that's really better, it was a better targeted name for how that money was being utilized. And this year that went up $5,000 for the park program supplies for the cost increase for the fireworks on the 4th of July.
Oh. Gotcha.
And so the park
Okay.
program supplies are stuff like bases for the ball field, tennis nets for the tennis courts, basketball nets and hoops that need to be replaced.
Okay.
Those type line items.
Thank you. And my last question is, and this is in the positive, of course, the fuel expense at Gibson Aiken, was there a reason for that positive outcome? Is that because of less use, or was it because of some of the efficiency things we were doing?
The fuel in
Gibson Aiken.
the fuel in Gibson Aiken, I think that has to do with the efficiencies and a better tracking of those expenses over the 5-year period.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Peter? Or
No, I trust Carol's knowledge of the details on that.
cool. Thank you.
Oh, Ian?
I have just a historic question. What, under Parks Electric, why in 2018 was it like double? And then all the other years, it's more like sitting at 10 grand, but in 2018 it was 21.
I think that the Park Electric is an interesting account. There's a lot that goes in there. All the little mini parks around town, all the expenses go in there. But the bigger thing, I'd have to go back into 18 and really track that to see if there was something that happened. But at Living Memorial Park, the skating rink and the upper ball field run off from the same meter.
Mhm.
Okay, so if I go back, I'm wondering if that particular year, oh, Peter?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I that's when the net metering was implemented. So in those areas where we have larger accounts, where we consume more electricity, you'll see in other departments as well, or other facilities as well, a significant drop from 18 to 19 because of the net metering credit that we receive for the solar array.
Oh. Okay. No, yeah, thank you. I just, it's helpful to sort of point those out and have them explained, as I'm looking at the historical averages as we move forward, and the increases. So, yeah.
Any more questions for Carol? Anyone? Well, seeing none, I'll thank you again very much, Carol, for joining us.
All right, thank you. You have a good evening.
You too.
Yeah.
So Peter, before we close, let's have a preview of next week's attractions.
Sure.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. It looks like an issue with the router and echo device. So try unplug both of them, then plug the router back. Once the router is back.
Thanks, Alexa. Go away.
So 1 week from tonight, we'll have a bit of other business to conduct as well, but the budget related items on the agenda will be the DBA will make its annual visit to present its work plan and its budget for FY23. The team from BDCC and CEVEDS will present its request for you to place onto the RTM warning the annual contribution to CEVEDS. And within our operating budget, we'll be looking at the equipment replacement schedule, both the items proposed for replacement in FY23 as well as the 25-year plan for context. The capital projects proposed for FY23 funding within a 5-year plan for context. And a third item, it's capital night in terms of the budget review. And usually it would be just those two pieces, but there's a third item next week where Carol will be back in front of you, and together with Patrick will be presenting a preview of the larger scale generational improvements that we see as becoming increasingly urgent at Living Memorial Park that will require borrowing. They're going to be beyond the scope of what we can afford to pay for in our year-to-year capital improvement plan. So there's been a tremendous amount of planning that's gone on. They're going to report to you about that planning, give sort of the general scope of the 5 component pieces, and talk about the work that's going to go on in the months ahead to refine the details of this, to be able to come back to you during the year. And then hopefully a year from now, have you feel comfortable forwarding a recommendation for doing the projects and financing the projects for consideration at the 2023 representative town meeting. The scale of these is large enough, and because of the borrowing that'll be involved, we think it's important for you to have a preview now that'll kind of set up the continuing consideration you'll give to this in the year ahead.
Great. And we'll be together at the fire station.
Indeed.
All right. Would anyone like to make a motion? Ian.
I move to adjourn.
Ian has moved to adjourn. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone, and thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody.
Right.
Yeah.